we go. Hi. Hi. They taught these bears to wave. You can wave too. I'm Nick Quaranto. I'm on Twitter. It's QRush if you want to bug me. Apparently, there's a video thing on there. I live in Buffalo, New York. I was in Boston for a while, but now I'm back in my hometown of Buffalo. There's a few guys from the Western New York Ruby group here, so say hi if you see them or if they yell at you. I work at 37 Signals. We're known for having a lot of loud opinions, including mine. And today, I'm hoping to share with you guys a lot of old and new patterns that I've found and learned while looking through the Basecamp Next code base, which I'm going to refer to as BCX on and off. That's kind of our internal code name for it. And a bunch of neato gems that are in there and that we've used and that I've heard of, and how stuff works. That's why we're here. That's why we're at RailsConf, to see how other people do this stuff. And it's really exciting to me to see how other people are. So you may hear conflicting or not conflicting opinions depending on what talks you've just been in, maybe. So you'll see. And then we're going to see how stuff works. So here's a little graph I whipped up with this cool program called Gorse. It tracks Git repositories and apparently fires little lasers out from people's avatars. And I think this is fun, but I have some stats to share. So Basecamp Next has been launched for 50 days, and this has been crazy for us. It's been really intense and active. It's been under development for 12 months. It was started back in April, and there's a little SWAT team that dropped in to see if it was worth for the rewrite. And then as things kept rolling along, more and more of the team kept coming on. When I came on in December, and basically until the launch in March, it was just full on. Almost everyone in the company was working on the product. There's been around 14,000 commits. I'm sure, give or take a few, because of branches getting thrown about. And the code-to-test ratio is 1:1, and this is controversial. I'm sorry. That's what the ratio is. And it's almost on the dot. It's kind of scary. I want to go over a little bit of what the app looks like. And this is not just from a production perspective, but also what it looks like on if you were a developer at 37, opening the app up and getting started with it. So of course, it's all based around a big Rails app. And we use a few databases, and I figured I'd go over those. We still use MySQL. We use memcache a ton for caching. DHH wrote a great blog post about how we have a terabyte basically memcache cluster. And that actually, I think a week or two ago, just started to get filled up. So it's just now evicting memory around 50 days after launch. And that's pretty crazy. My suggestion was, let's just buy another terabyte. But that wasn't, our ops guys didn't like that. Redis. We use Redis a bunch for rescue, mostly. We also use Redis for live updates on pages. And, but MySQL is still the big guy. And I would say memcache is used more than Redis in the app. And we also use Elasticsearch. I don't know too much about it, but when you do a search on Basecamp Next, it goes through Elasticsearch, and it's pretty cool. There's a few other services that the Rails app depends on that we haven't talked about much, and I think it's cool to highlight them because there's not just one app that we deal with. Depot is one of them. I think this has been around for a while. This is where we store files. I think it's like an old Rails pun, the Depot. There's another one, Portfolio. This is a whole different service that handles avatars across all the apps. There's one called Launchpad. So if you've ever gone to like the single sign-in part where you jump in and you pick what product you want to sign into, that's Launchpad. That handles all the sign-in authentication junk for Basecamp. And Queenbee. Queenbee is where the honey is made, apparently. That's the billing system that we use that talks to all of the apps. And that is completely separate service that is much better tested. So you might think, is this all a blob? Look at how sad he is. Is this a blob? Is this a monolith? And if there's one thing I've learned from all these services hooking together and getting it working is that I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel like this all the time. And I think these guys, they've been learning and how to grow the architecture. And I think we're all learning, and we're all trying to make this better. So over the years, they've been improving it, and I think we're going to be still improving all of those boxes we just saw. The front ends, I think, are cool to talk about. This is just how the servers work. This is pretty standard, but I think it's neat to discuss. There's really two main components that we serve along with Rails. There's another one called Polar that pulls for page updates. So if someone's updated a comment or if someone has a new to-do, there's a whole separate thing that uses rainbows. Has anyone heard of rainbows? Okay, so a few people. We've all heard of Unicorn. Rainbows is like its strange cousin. It's also written by Eric Wong that I actually don't know too much about, but I do know it's awesome when you need to do long polling. So definitely check Rainbows out. I'm pretty sure that's also fronted by Nginx. And of course, our Rails processes are also fronted by Unicorn and Nginx, and there's a bunch of those. There's also a bunch of Rainbows as well. So basically, Rainbows is pretty cool along with Unicorn. It's kind of its long-lost cousin, and no one talks about it too much. So what does setting up Basecamp Next look on a local machine? And it's pretty simple. All you need is MySQL. All those other dependencies, Redis, Memcache, Elasticsearch, you don't need them to get started or run the tests or anything. And that's, I think, kind of neat because it lets everyone who needs to work on the app get started up a lot quicker. And if you actually do need to use them, then you can just drop it in and go. That's all fronted by, and those two things are fronted by POW. POW is written by my coworker Sam, and it's a really nice OS X-enabled server for Rails and Ruby apps, really. And I think it's written in Node, which is kind of weird, and I was really skeptical at first. But this is really an awesome piece of software. And it's obscenely simple. You basically just symlink in the directory where your Rails app is, and POW takes care of the rest. And if you haven't checked this out for local development, please do. It's wonderful. I haven't typed Rails server in a month or two. It's been great. So that's fronted by POW. Out of all those other services that we depend on, you actually only need two other things to work with Basecamp Next locally. So I think this is neat to talk about. How do we get set up? You also need Launchpad, which is how you do sign-in. So that's also fronted by POW. And Portfolio, which is how you do avatars. Because if you don't have avatars, the whole site kind of looks stupid. So that's also fronted by POW. So you need these three things to get started working on it. And that's pretty much it. And usually the two other services, you set them up once, and then you're done. So this is what POW gives you at it registers an entire TLD on your local machine at .dev, which is, I'm amazed that's even possible on OS X. And Portfolio lives at 37 image. I'm not sure why. And BCX and Launchpad live there. So most of the time, you're just going to bcx.dev, and you're on. So there's no, POW is pretty nice, and it lets you do service development like we do really easily. What does the testing look like? So apparently, there's some opinions going around that all we do at 37 Signals is programming. This is how it works, right? Programming all day. I don't have hair like that, though. So we do have a pretty extensive test suite. And we use Test Unit primarily and Mocha for stubbing and mocking. And I've introduced a few things, and no one's yelled at me yet, so I'm waiting for that. I've introduced Capybara. We use that mostly for some defunct acceptance tests, which I'm going to talk about. And we also use Capybara for the selector API, which we use in action controller tests, which is a lot nicer than a search select. And I don't even know why search select is around still. I also wrote a little gem called M, which if you've written test unit tests and you want to run a test by a line number, you can do that with the little gem I wrote. It only works with test unit and Minitest so far. But it's pretty neat, and it saves me a few minutes of time every now and again. So M is pretty cool. So what does the actual test suites look like? This is something that isn't talked about enough. This is kind of my theme today, that we need to talk more about these. I think they're mundane but interesting things because they're how we share things. This is what we do on a daily basis. So we have the three typical test suites in our app, and we also have a few others. If you were in Mike Moore's talk yesterday about presenters, he talked about a JSON, how to test a JSON API. And that's what he talked about is exactly what we have. We have an entirely different test suite that knows how to post JSON with the correct headers and parse it back with the correct headers. And that's cordoned off in its own directory with all its own tests. We also have a test for the polar, because that needs tests. And there's also a Rails engine that's shared across all of our apps called 37ID that we also run the test for, because we want to make sure that stuff like email validation works and so on works within this app along with all the other apps. There's also two other test suites that are kind of on the fritz that I want to get working again. We have an acceptance test suite that mostly is just a straight up test unit in Capybara workflow that was working for a while, and hopefully we're going to get working again soon, although the integration tests are all right so far. And we also have a client tests. So we have a little CoffeeScript test runner to test some really complex junk on the front end. And that's not fully baked yet. I would love to, we've been talking about looking into Phantom.js and some other test runners. We seem to have an aversion to Selenium. And hopefully soon, we feel that's kind of half-baked. Once it's fully baked and I get it green, working within our test build, I want to get that in. But hopefully soon, we'll see. So one cool thing I learned about all these different test suites is that we chain rake tasks. I hadn't seen this kind of thing before, so I'm going to show you. So there's a nice little, this is kind of unnecessary. This is how we define the API tests that are in Basecamp Next. You can do a Rails subtest task. I think you could just do a rake test task. This might do some extra kind of setup. But this is just the typical, here's where my tests live. Here, I need to include these libraries. And then we tell that to run by using this neat rake API. So you can load up a specific rake task and call enhance on it. And that, instead of overriding an existing rake task, this kind of says, hook this behavior after that runs. And the cool thing is that this behavior will also fail if that original test fails. So if our units, functionals, or integration tests fail, it won't run the API test like we would expect. So inside of that block, you could do anything. Here we're choosing to invoke the API tests. So this is kind of neat. I hadn't seen this kind of chaining behavior before. Usually it's just I stomp all over the rake tasks that are in the app, and we move on with our lives. But this is kind of cool. All right. Whew, how are we doing so far? All right, thank you. I needed that, I'm sorry. I also need some water. Development setup. So this is another usually we don't talk about this kind of thing. And I think this is important. I think not only is this important for getting new developers set up, but I think this is important just for your sanity. How many times have you opened your Rails app and it's like, you want to just blow, like, the cartridge isn't working. This is a blow on the cartridge to fix bugs for those in the back, right? So it's not working. You bang it, try to get it to work, and it's just not working. And you just try everything and you waste a few hours. So I really think that all apps should have a reset button, right? We shouldn't be banging on it. We shouldn't be blowing on the cartridge. It just should be reset, and then we're done. And that's what we have, and it's really nice. We have one bash script that does this. You could write it in Ruby. You could write it in whatever the heck you want. We use bash. And that's simply at script setup. And I wish this was more of a convention on apps I've seen everywhere. This is a convention we have now everywhere inside of the apps at 37. So typically on a normal day, work day, I'd script setup and then rake. So if I just woke up, got pulled from Git, script setup, rake, got a clean build, I'm ready to roll for the day. So what does this typically do? It typically does 4 things. Sets up the app, whatever magic you need to do there, usually bundling. It will reset the database. There's usually a little dance you have to play. You have to drop the databases and then create them, load the schema, migrate, whatever you need to do there. Restart the server. Since we're using POW, it's pretty easy. It's like Passenger. You can just do touch temp restart. .txt, and you're off. And then whatever custom wrangling you need to do. So maybe you need to install some extra gems, or maybe you need an external package of some sort. So that's what script setup can do for you. And it is a reset button. I definitely recommend you guys have it. Some little tips in there. I think you should keep it quiet. There's a nice little bashism that you can wrap a bunch of commands in brackets and then redirect their output somewhere. And this is nice. So we always say is installing libraries, we let bundler scream its head off about what's wrong, and then we do the magic we need to do with rbn. And that's all kind of wrapped up. If it fails, then you can redirect this output to somewhere. Typically, we redirect it to like a setup log file. So if it fails, you can see what happened. Another deal is we use flags to speed up. So some people were noticing that resetting the database was taking more than a few seconds. So someone added a keep DB flag. And the bash flags are like the worst syntax. So maybe you want to write this in Ruby instead. Be my guest. But if you add the keep DB flag, then it'll skip the slow part of the setup. So keep that reset button rolling fast. Concerns. This is a cool little Ruby code snippet. So we saw a bunch of bash. I'm going to do mostly Ruby and JavaScript for the rest. No more bash. I'm sorry. I think this concerns comes from this general feeling with Rails that sharing code is hard. And this is, I think, just part of the nature of our work, is that we need to share code. We don't want to repeat ourselves. And sharing that code is difficult. And of course, we could go crazy with patterns and OO, and you should. But I think the simplest way of sharing code, it's not as easy as it could be. So the way that we've kind of dealt with that is using concerns, which are an active support little thing. And apparently, I spelled concern wrong. So active support concern is a nice little class that you can maybe it's a module, I don't remember. But you can extend it in an existing module. And then you get two nice little things. First of all, it works like a normal module. So at the bottom, you can put any kind of instance methods you want. And then you get an included block, which you can then put class methods in. Without active support concern, you have to do a bunch of kind of wacky Ruby. It looks like Ruby internal gook in order to do it. And now you don't have to. So that's really nice. This pattern we use a ton. And one example of this is with AJAX. So we have an AJAX concern. This is mixed into a controller. So in the included block, we can have a before filter. You can put whatever kind of junk you would normally put at the top level of a controller. And then you can have instance methods on the bottom. This is pretty nice. And I think the bonus we get here, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So we use this all the time in models. We have a lot of shared behavior. So trashing things. How do I put something in the trash bin and then take it back out? That's in a concern. Searching, how do different models expose what's searchable. Buckets, which is if it's a project or a calendar. Permissions, are you allowed to see this thing? Controllers, it's the same deal. This is things you see across all sorts of different controllers. I got to render assets, so I need to render a file out. Are you allowed to be here? Authorization. And authentication, who are you, right? Current person and account. Who are you logged in as? What account are you attached to? So that's something you need across every controller. And the nice thing what this pattern gives is I think it lets you group alike methods. Typically, I've seen that application controller particularly becomes just a huge grab bag of a mess. And I think what this does is it kind of groups those together and keeps it a little neater. So the application controller, and this is not all of it, it's mostly just includes. There's actually not a single top-level method that's an application controller in Basecamp Next. We just have a bunch of concerns. And it's really refreshing to open that up and see it. Because then if you need to add a new one, well, it's either it fits in one of these or you can split it out. And adding something in there almost feels gross. It's like I don't want to touch this pristine niceness. Of course, a TSA, I don't have, or a PSA. Whoa. Had too much fun at the airport, apparently. So the more you know, of course, modules are not classes. And if you include a bunch of methods, that main class is still going to be a ball of mud. So this is not an excuse for designing your internal Rails architecture to be good. And I think what it does enable, though, is it enables one of the simplest refactors we know about, which is extract method. Right, so I don't want to share code between two. I need to share code between two things. I pull it out into one place. So that's like the simplest thing we can do, and that's what we've done. And of course, like that big list, right? We still have this big class full of all these methods. It's going to happen. All right, assets. We have a lot of them. I did a line count. This was maybe 2 weeks ago, and we have around the same amount of Ruby and CoffeeScript lines, and more tests than either one of those. So I think this line count is actually really indicative of the experience I've had, where it's basically 50-50 Ruby and CoffeeScript. And CoffeeScript is wonderful, and as we've heard, learn it. There's also a lot of SCSS too. We use Sass, and there's a bunch of mix-ins. But frankly, I did not read any of that. OK. So of course, I've written Sass in there, but I'm not going to talk about any. You can bug one of our designers if you'd like to hear. As for, here's what's in our vendor assets. Basecamp Next is all jQuery. There's no prototype. We use Backbone and underscore a ton. Those libraries are wonderful. We actually brought over Node.js's event emitter, which is a neat little piece of code. And we use two things that are worth, I think, an extra mention, which are WYSI-HTML and Echo. Echo was written by my coworker Sam, and it's a really nice JavaScript templating framework library. And there's, of course, a million options here. There's handlebars, and I think jQuery comes with its own, and I think Backbone has one that works by default. This one is pretty nice. If you're used to ERB, it works. And it does pretty much what you'd expect. So if you haven't seen Echo, check it out. Another thing that's pretty cool, if you need to do any kind of WYSIWYG type stuff, and if you've dealt, like I have with TinyMCE or FCK editor or any of the other terrible choices, this is, I think, the least of the terrible choices. This is a pretty much ground-up rewrite of a nice WYSIWYG editor. Then the author is extremely responsive. I've seen him fix issues usually under everything we found. He's fixed under 24 hours. And that is such a nice deal to have. So this is a really nice project if you need to do any kind of WYSIWYG stuff in your Rails app. We also use a bunch of jQuery plugins that may or may not be worth mentioning. Scroll to, easing, embedly is a neat service. Cookies, why isn't everyone does anyone not deal with cookies? I think everyone deals with cookies. Why is that not in jQuery? I don't understand. There's probably an argument I don't understand there. MD5 and outside events. So we use a bunch of jQuery plugins and sprockets and the asset pipeline. Just make this easy to figure out. But I want to talk about that. I want to talk about JavaScript patterns. So of course, there's a lot of CoffeeScript in our app, but there's a bunch of general JavaScript patterns that I think are worth mentioning that I found. And we're Rails developers, right? I know I should be talking about Ruby, but I think this is part of it. This is part of the entire Rails structure. And I think talking about this kind of stuff is important. I think we are definitely the leaders here, and we can set an example. We extend jQuery all the time. There's over 100 of these guys. $.fn, and then you can dip into jQuery and add whatever the heck you want. So this is typically you'd see this is like plugin type stuff in jQuery, but we use this for custom stuff. One example is highlighting. So if you want to highlight just a little yellow flash on an element, you can dip right into jQuery to do that. And we use jQuery UI, which is another library I didn't mention, for that. One that I wrote, reset form, which will remove a CSS class and then use the native DOM reset method. And then, of course, you can chain things. As we know with jQuery, you can continue to call methods if you return this. For some reason, with CoffeeScript, if you return @ it just looks really gross. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that's like that. Just an @ just kind of feels weird at the end of the method. One neat thing, and this isn't really new, we have a BCX object on window. And I think this is pretty standard. If you want to contain the JavaScript scope leak, you kind of cram it all within one object. So here's what that looks like. And this is one of the first legitimate examples I've seen of the sprockets js.coffee.erb. A lot of people laughed at this when they first were like, why would you? This is crazy. But I think this is a legit example. So in there, we use the CoffeeScript's existential operator for defining window.bcx. So basically, if window.bcx is not already there, it will define it. That is kind of like pipe equals in Ruby, but it does some other weird things because JavaScript is stupid. We then extend a bunch of stuff into it. So we use underscore, which will basically mix in a bunch of stuff. It's kind of like a hash merge. And we'll bring in a model, empty object for models, collections, and views. So when we want to expose those to other things, because CoffeeScript will usually wrap everything in a closure. So when we want to expose things publicly, we'll dip into BCX models, BCX collections, BCX views. And we'll embed the Rails environment. We also embed a few other things in here in this file as well, but I think this is the simplest example. So this is a legit use of the whole asset pipeline at work. And I think it's pretty neat. Data behaviors. So part of the Rails UJS thing was to use HTML data attributes. And we use data behavior to define all sorts of custom junk on the client. And we actually have a ton of these. I lost count with how many we have. And you might say, oh, there's a bunch. Do you really care about how many? In my opinion is, So we really have a ton of these. I think the nice bonus is that it keeps JavaScript logics out of the views. We stopped tying behavior to CSS classes, which is really important, so our designers can go crazy and refactor CSS classes if they want to. And the nice thing is that they're really still easy to query for. So instead of attaching to an ID or a CSS class, we instead attach to the data behavior attribute on an element. And then we use the squiggly equals, which is backwards from the Ruby regex, like equals squiggly, and it really ticks me off. But you can do data behavior and then whatever. So here's how we would attach date pickers. So data behavior, squiggly equals, so anywhere's inside of date behavior. So I could have date picker and expandable and something else. So I can have more than one data behavior. And then I can I can do whatever I want on that selector. Typically, we'll use live, which will say every time a new data behavior with date picker comes on the page, I will attach this behavior to it on focus. So live is pretty cool as well. There's a nice little project that we're not using yet, but Josh Peak, who's now at GitHub, wrote Rails behaviors, which can get you started on this path. So this is neat to check out. It does a few cool things, and it's kind of in the direction of where we've been going. So hopefully, maybe this will see its way into Rails. Who knows? This is a really neat project, though, and I think it deserves more attention. OK, page events. So this is more of a I think, one of the cooler parts of VCX. And it all revolves around using custom events. Custom events, especially with underscore, are really easy to use. And if you haven't played with bind or trigger in underscore, it's really worth your time to look into it. So you can basically have custom events for anything that you need. And we use this a lot. My only advice here is keep the namespacing consistent. If you pick something, roll with it and be consistent everywhere, and you'll thank yourself later. So this goes into what we call internally stacker, which is how pages are stacked up in the UI for Basecamp Next. The basics here, so if you've seen Basecamp Next, there's a page, and then it layers another page on top. And that's stacker at work. And the simplest way to say how it works is that it intercepts pretty much all clicks on A tags. So we'll intercept that, and instead of actually going out to the page, we'll request it with jQuery.ajax. And then we'll render that response as a new page. So instead of putting it, instead of doing whatever we would normally do with that response, we're going to open a new page up and then get whatever the HTML was and stick it in that new page. And the really nice thing is that it's smart about errors as well. And I think this is a very undervalued thing when you're doing not just single page apps, but any kind of Ajax work, is that we get development errors all the time, right, when you're working locally. And you should be smart about them. And the amount of time you save just to not jump into the WebKit console and see like, oh man, what did I get? What was the response body? But you're going to get that all the time. So spend the time to do it properly. And this does. And it will render that response as a new page. So if we get an error, it'll show up as a new page as well. So those are like maybe a second or two that I've saved, and it's still so worth it. That's what Stacker does, and I think it's pretty simple because it's based around this library, history.js. This kind of abstracts away all the push state, PJAX kind of nonsense that I don't know too much about, because it's in there. And this guy has figured it out and has made it work cross-browser. So if you want to do any kind of stuff, like if you see in that, like what we do, or the GitHub-style tree finder where it goes into each file, this is a really good library to check out, history.js. So what do the custom page events look like? And they look like this. We have an on function on the BCX object that takes in 3 different events. We've got a before change, a change, and an update. We also include a little description of what it does, which is also important. I'm going to show you what that does. So there's these 3 events, and they fire at different times. Before change will usually fire before the page is shown. So before that page, before the page gets there, we'll fire this event. And this does stuff like it'll set what current project you're on, the calendar. It'll apply classes to body to make the whole page look different if we need to. And it'll also start performance timing as well if you're on a local host and you want to track how things are going slow. Page change is fired pretty much every time a new page is loaded. So if you go to if you go to the calendar, or if you go to the to-dos inside of your project, this is firing every time basically a new URL would be loaded. And usually this will handle installing views, could be backbone views, could be a whole mess of behavior based on those data behavior elements. We'll also hide and show elements based on roles. So sometimes, because of the caching system, we need to render an admin link. And maybe you're not an admin, so we'll hide it. Of course, from the Rails side, it's protected. But on the front end, this is where we would hide it. We also start lazily loading data as well. If we've got a lot of data that would be expensive to render out, then we'll say on page change, I will start loading it up or prepare it to load up. There's also page update. This is fired after every change. So if you, instead of going to a new page, let's say you just messed with the to-do, you checked it off, or you edited it, or maybe you posted a comment, you won't get a whole page change, you'll just get a little update. And that'll usually include a little HTML blob that we need to put on the page. It'll also stop busy animations. So the little spinners, it'll stop those from happening. So those are the custom events, and they look a lot like this. We don't show this, of course, on production, but on localhost, we have a bunch of benchmarks which are really cool. And that's why we wrapped it in that on function, so we can track, OK, here's when it started, and here's where it ended. And there's a lot of console magic that's going on here, and I want to talk to you guys about it, because I didn't know about a lot of these things. And this thing just makes me feel, oh my God, yeah! That's so good, this logging. So I'm going to show you guys what this is. So there's a lot of console mastery, and I think a lot of this is owed to my coworker Sam, who's awesome at this. And I haven't heard a lot about these, and when I heard about them, it's crazy. That's what I felt like. So one is console count. This is really simple. It just counts things. I rendered a to-do, and I rendered another to-do. I need just a count. So that'll work. You can give it a string. You can just say console count, and it'll just start bumping up a number. I know you're thinking, but let's continue. So there's two other ones that are really neat. There's more than that. Warn and error. So if you need a message to stand out, if you need a little yellow exclamation point or a red one, you can make those stand out. So if there's an event, special thing you want to be special, you can do that. Group and group end are really cool too. You can group a clump of logs together that maybe you want to collapse up because maybe they're not important, or maybe because they're all related. So here's an example of that. This is basically what happens on every page load. And we've got two examples of what I just said. There's a warn. It'll do the little arrow. Typically, we'll see this. Usually, the browsers will spit their own warnings out, but you can make your own. And then this other guy is group. So we can group on page update, and then all the console logs after you do the group will have this in it. So these are really neat techniques that they don't get enough attention. There's two other things with the end syntax that's pretty cool. There's profiling. And profile end, you can see what's slow. You can also give it a name. So I didn't know this, but we've seen this. Everyone's seen this, I hope. The WebKit inspector. There's a whole tab for profiles. Who's clicked on this tab before? OK, I'm teaching some people stuff. Awesome. There's a whole tab for this, and it shows you how long things took. And it's wonderful. You get to see how long a JavaScript function took, and usually it's traced back to some really slow jQuery function you wrote. So this is really, really nice. There's a whole tab for this, and it deserves a lot more attention. You can also say, let me profile something slow. And you can give it a name, and it will show up. I think you can have more than one running as well. Another cool thing, you can put debugger anywhere in your JavaScript code, and that will stop, and that will enable the debugger in the script tab. I think that works in Firefox too, and it's great. You can also get a custom console trace, a stack trace of where you are. That, I don't know how I lived before this. This is kind of obscure. Chrome CSI. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yeah, OK. I'm way too excited about this. Chrome CSI is really cool. You can see how long it's been since the page loaded. If you run this guy, that page T is apparently the time since the page loaded. So if you want to benchmark things since the page started to load, you can do that, only on Chrome, which is kind of crappy. There's also a load times thing, which apparently Chrome's paint things. And you can see if it was fetched with SPDY and all sorts of other stuff. This is only on Chrome, and it's a real bummer. So if anyone wants a free open source project to write a wrapper around Chrome CSI that works across every browser. And I'll love you. Speaking of love, we do a bunch of really neat API building stuff in Basecamp Next. And this is going to conflict with everything you've heard so far. And I'm sorry. We use a GitHub repo for sharing the API docs, which is new for us. The existing API documentation is in like a really crappy static site, and this is the first time we've done it in just straight up Markdown in GitHub, and this is really great. So if you need an option for writing up API docs for your company's service, or even if it's internal, go with GitHub because it's great, and they render the Markdown really, really nicely. And you don't have to spend time building a little site. You just write Markdown and you're done. The first thing we use, and this is, if you were in Yehuda's talk, I think this is mostly what he was complaining about, was jbuilder. Jbuilder is a thing DHH cooked up to render out JSON responses. And it's kind of like the XML builder. Here's what it looks like. It's kind of awkward, but it works. There's a JSON builder, so typically, right, with the XML builder, we'd have an XML object that we call all sorts of junk on. There's a JSON object, same deal. This would be in a Rails view. A normal Rails view, this is what you'd see in it. it would be like show.json.jbuilder. And from top to bottom here, we're saying I want, at the top level of my document, I want the ID, title, content, and timestamps from the document instance variable. I also want a last updater object with ID and name. And then I'm going to render a partial. So I've got comments attached to my document, and I want to render those out. So that's nice. The kind of JSON dot and then the parentheses is kind of weird, but it works. And this is what you get. So you get a bunch of things at the top level, right, from the document. You get the last updater, like we wanted, in its own separate object. And then comments, we don't have any on this document. But if you did, it would render out that partial for everything. So the question is, of course, why not toJSON? And this is, I think, the win. And I think the win is that you keep the view data in the views. I've worked on a bunch of apps where toJSON kind of gets a mess, especially with the asJSON, toJSON dance. And I think the nice thing is that this, I've always felt like, OK, like what am I going to override? Am I going to do this? Like, there's the only and except, includes, there's all these crazy options. You need to check the sparse documentation and see what's going on. And this kind of simplifies it. It keeps the view data in the views. A nice thing is that you get to use partials as well. So it's like a normal Rails HTML view. Another distinction that we use, we have basically public versus private JSON. So we have internal uses of toJSON, and I don't have to worry about breaking that. Like messing around with that won't break the API because it's private versus public. So of course, if you were in Yehuda's talk, he talked about this whole serializer thing. Maybe that'll be cool. Who knows? It's worth a shot. But this is pretty neat to check out as well if you're doing a JSON API. Another neat thing is strong parameters. I think this is kind of a response to the GitHub mess with param filtering. And it's actually, the pattern's not that bad. It's a little confusing, but it's not too bad. It's different from what you would expect from normal Rails apps. So typically with Rails apps, we would not filter the parameters in the controller, but strong parameters does that. So here's a typical update action for our API. We've got document params, a method that then calls a bunch of weird things on the params object itself. So this dips into the Rails API and adds a bunch of stuff. And the first thing it adds is a required method. And that will say, I need the document hash to be in the params hash. So it would be document and then a hash of junk. And out of that hash of junk, I'm only going to allow title and content, nothing else. So if I've got an author ID in there, that won't be allowed. If I've got like a completed or draft flag, that won't be allowed. So these are the only things that are allowed from that hash. One thing this does require, there's a Rails thing called wrap parameters that will wrap a response with a symbol, so you can make sure that the params are always wrapped with document. So that's another thing you may have to look into. But the cool thing, what I like about this, is that instead of attr accessible, I think this forces the idea that it's a controller, not a model problem, to figure out when you need to reject people based on their params. So instead of whitelisting or blacklisting the stuff we need, we're saying, OK, here's what's not allowed, and you're going to be kicked right out in the controller instead of dipping down in the model and coming back up. The nice thing is that you can still share that kind of parsing with concerns. So it's not like you've lost all the power there. The argument that like, oh, it's in the model, it's one place, is not accurate. And I think it's, like I said, it's more natural to return error and status codes for this kind of thing in the controller. It's a controller concern, not a model concern. Another neat API thing that I hadn't really seen before, this is entirely, it's semi-Rails specific. There's HTTP 204 no content. This is a really neat site that http status.es that you can type in a HTTP status code, and it will not only give you an explanation of what it is, but it will also give you that little symbol that no one remembers, and you have to look up and you find a blog post from 5 years ago about which symbols are what status code, and it's on that site. So you can go there and get that stuff. And what HTTP 204 says is that it's a successful response, but you don't need to include a body. So this is important for JSON APIs because by default, if you render no body with Rails, it will actually include a space. If you say like no body at all, it will still include a space because Safari does some weird junk if you don't, like an old version of Safari, if I ever go, will do some junk. So this no content says there's 0 response body in the response. So this is great because JSON parsers will fail if you try to do JSON. If you try to JSON parse a space, it'll fail. How messed up is that? Just a space. This is 2012, and we fail on spaces. And the nice thing, so JSON, if you use 204, the JSON parsers from pretty much every browser won't fail on spaces. So you can use this on create and destroy actions. I really suggest that you only use it on APIs, though. And that's because our good friend Internet Explorer can't read headers. So despite all that, I think it's still worth it. This is how I feel. I hate Internet Explorer with passion. And sometimes I know you just want to be like, this is the worst. I see this bug, and it's like, nope. Let's keep going. OK. OK. How are we doing? Good. All right. I'm going a little fast, as normal. All right. Logging. So we do a lot of logging in production for Basecamp Next. And it's worth it, because when shit's on fire, yo, you want to have logging. Why he's pointing to the fire? You should be helping. This is how I feel. It's like, there's a fire, guys. We've got to fix it. So we log everything. I'm not kidding. We log every SQL query that's coming out of Basecamp Next, we log, because we need to know what's wrong when things go wrong. We also log a bunch of other things. We do unique IDs per request. We do account IDs for log splitting. And we also log the controller and actions on each SQL query. I'm going to show you how all that works. And we heard about this in Aaron's talk, the active support tag logger. We actually use this. This is not of dubious value, but of great value for us. So this is actually pretty neat, and I'm going to show you why. And this is new as of Rails 3.2. So in your configure block for your Rails app, you can have there's a log tags array. And I think it's in like when you generate an app now, there's a little comment that has that exact line. If you uncomment that, you get this nice little mess of characters that is unique for each request. So what that means is that if you find a slow query or something's going weird and your log file is many gigabytes, you then have this unique string that you can pull out and grep for just that one request and see what happened. That is of immense value for us. If something went wrong, I can track it down to the exact place where it happened and see the entire thing, the entire story. Another crazy thing, and this is just a mess of code that I saw, and I was like, what is this doing? So we're going to find out what it does. So log tags can not only take symbols and strings, it can also take procs. So this is valid Ruby code. This is so weird. There's a stabby lambda, and then there's this request thing hanging out. Apparently, that's the argument for this function, which is weird. And then there's a lambda, and that will return whatever is the return from that lambda is what's going to be tagged in the log. So we actually will bring in the Queen Bee ID, so that's an internal thing about what ID you are with our building system, and we'll tag that in every single line of the log. So this is really wild, and I wanted to dip into how this works, and I think it's worth it to share. So what is that? That just blew my mind. I love these Ruby 1.9 lambdas. Every time I see them, my brain melts a little bit more. And I think you can use this for really extremely configurable logging. So we use it for that. I'm sure there will be more crazy uses of it. And another neat thing that I didn't see before was you can use the rack environment to share data. If you figured out something way up in a middleware, you can dump it into the rack environment, and it will come, and you can still access it way down deep in the request, or backwards, either way. So this is a pretty neat pattern that I haven't seen too much of. Maybe it's gross, it probably is, but it's a neat little thing. So how does that log tagging work? I looked into Rails, in the lib-rails application RB that's in Railsize. There's a whole chain of middleware that gets set up, and one of the middlewares is a logger, the Rails rack logger, and that takes in the log tags as an argument. So there's a little logger that will basically do, if the tags are defined, and we saw a little bit of this code in Aaron's talk, it'll compute some tags and then call the environment. And if not, then it will just call the environment, which is what we would expect from a typical rack middleware. So what does compute tags do? And it does a few crazy things. First of all, it loads up the request. So we're going to get an actual object for the request from the environment. And then That's where the magic happens. So we're going to then take that request and spit it into the tag, which is a proc. So it will say, OK, proc, here's my request. Do whatever you need, do whatever dark magic you want to, and give me back the tag that you wanted. The other crazy thing, so this is how that UUID thing works. It'll call a method directly on the request. So let's hope you got the method name right. And then if you tagged it with the string, that'll work as well. So that's how the log tags work. Maybe it's terrible, maybe it's not, but we get a ton of value out of this. And if you need to do something similar, it's in Rails. So of course, that's not all the logging we do. This can't be real. Yesterday, my coworker Noah released this library. I think Marginalia. It sounds like a weird form of bacteria. It's not. So this is a library that we just released, open source yesterday, and it does a few cool things. What it does right now is it will add a query comment to the end of every SQL query that will say the application name, the controller it came from, and the action that query came from. So that's really neat because you get to see, it's another clue in the puzzle to see where a bug is lying. And if there's a slow query especially, you can see that as well. How you set this up, you just need to drop gem query comments in your gem file. And then if you want to configure the application name, I'm pretty sure that'll work too. So I think by default, it will read the application name. It'll try to figure that out. But then you can also set it if you need to. So like I said, you get to know where slow query is coming from. A big deal for us is that you can tell if queries came from the web or the background jobs immediately because the background jobs won't have a controller in action. And apparently, I just had to correct my slides. This now supports not just MySQL, SQLite, and there's literally a pull request that was just being worked on before I started for Postgres. So hopefully this will work everywhere. Another little note that I was seeing that apparently the MySQL database engine will do weird things based on the query cache because if your comments in queries are different, it has trouble caching them. Apparently, we don't run the query cache. So there's a blog post on signals versus noise right now that explains why that is. So if you want to know why, either I can show you or you can go check out that blog post. How am I doing on time here? Getting close. All right, one more thing. Let's go quickly. Stats. So we do a bunch of stats. This is my last deal. We use statsd a lot. There's a lot of great blog posts that Etsy has put out and just a ton of great information about statsd. And my coworker Jeremy has forked the statsd Ruby library, and that's the one we use in production. What we do with this is we track usage and performance. Mostly, we'll just track stuff that we want to know about. So successful or failed logins is one thing we'll track. Process emails, how many of those we do a day. The number of people invited on a form is an example of one of the things we track. Did we design the form the right way, right? Were our assumptions correct? Maybe if too many people are invited, maybe we need to think about that. So we have a little statsd metric set up for that. The way this works is through active support notifications, and there was a whole talk, so I'm sorry if you've heard this twice. But this is pretty neat. There's an instrument method on that class that will take two things. The first thing is an event name, and the second thing is a hash payload. And that hash payload, there can be anything in there. And what we've picked is a measurement symbol with a login succeeded string. So that login succeeded string is what is basically the name of the metric in statsd that we're going to track. So the other end of this is you can subscribe to notifications. You can do it with a regex. You get a whole mess of arguments. And all we care about is the payload. And with the statsd library, it's pretty easy, statsd.increment, and then with whatever measurement we got. So in this case, it'll be the successful logins. So that'll shoot it off to statsd, and we forget about it. So this is a really neat pattern. If you haven't seen the active support instrumentation and you need to start counting stuff, this is what to check out. Oh, we also use one little other thing for statsd, rescue statsd. This was hilarious from the README. Tests are on the way, but it's used in production already. And I lulled at that one. This tracks a bunch of things about rescue. You get to know how many jobs were in queued, failed, completed, and a really important one, how long it took. Right? If our jobs start taking longer and longer and longer and longer, that's a really bad sign. So that's all I had. We're still learning. I think we're definitely trying out a lot of new stuff with this project, and I don't think we'll stop. And I think the lesson that I have, at least, is we haven't stopped evolving the system, and I hope I've taught you guys something. So thanks for listening.